Even if grammar is not your thing, you've probably had some discussion about it before. Someone may have corrected your spelling online. You yourself may have corrected someone's grammar. Or you may have argued about the use of commas or apostrophes. Especially online, these discussions can sometimes turn into heated debates. That's when you may also have heard someone being accused of being a prescriptivist, or being a descriptivist who doesn't care about proper grammar. I've got some ideas about this so-called feud between prescriptivists and descriptivists, so let's talk about it and see what the fighting is all about. Hi, welcome to Snap Language. I'm Mark Franco. Grammars are beautiful. Yes, I said grammars, plural. Simply put, the grammar of a language is a set of rules that speakers use to produce sentences that communicate meaning. But languages come in different varieties. For example, you have formal written English and you have informal spoken English. Besides, people in different parts of the English-speaking world use different varieties of the language. Even within the same geographical area, you have different linguistic communities with sometimes minor, sometimes major differences in how they use the language. You also have different registers within the same linguistic community. Register is the way you speak depending on the social circumstance. You change the way you speak when you talk to family and friends, or when you talk to a stranger at a store, or to a client at work. So one grammar cannot account for all these varieties and registers. With all this variation, how can people communicate? Well, in addition to the grammars people use in their language variety, there's also a standard grammar. To simplify things, let's think of these grammars only in terms of the standard grammar of the language and the grammar of everyday spoken English, at least for this video. As we saw in the previous video, these standard and informal grammars sometimes have conflicting rules, but overall we manage. But of course, standard grammar is better, right? If you want to speak proper English, you must follow the standard grammar rules. Well, that's a judgment that's very deeply ingrained in most of us, probably because of how we're educated. This idea that English must be used a certain way, period. If you think like that, people will call you a prescriptivist. You believe a well-written text should follow conventions that determine what constructions are acceptable, how words are spelled, and how you form and punctuate your sentences. Well, yeah, but wait, that's not where it gets nasty. This way of thinking ignores the fact that there are different language varieties and registers. If you're not writing or speaking in a very formal situation, why should the same rules apply? On the other hand, if you consider yourself a descriptivist, you believe grammar should describe how language is actually used. Standard grammar reflects an idealized version of the language that's used in its formal register. So to say something is grammatically correct or incorrect ignores the fact that people do have an internal grammar with its own rules that people follow when they use the language in different registers. Well, yeah, and people start fighting over it. In my opinion, these arguments can be a bit misguided. Standard grammar has a purpose. It establishes rules everyone can follow, particularly in formal language. But then, many grammarians become prescriptivists when they set out on a crusade against what they call bad English. They see themselves as guardians of proper language. They want to stop the language from decaying. It's borderline irrational to expect people should use the same grammar rules regardless of register in all social situations. We saw that that's not how language works. The right grammar in the wrong setting comes across as stilted and bookish. In their zeal to educate speakers about how they should use the language, they come across as out of touch, elitist. Well, they come across as snobs. Which I guess is fine, right? Being a grammar snob doesn't hurt anybody. Well, until it does. When some prescriptivists say someone's grammar or accent makes them sound uneducated or stupid, they may be using shaming as a tool to encourage people to use standard grammar. Using shaming as an instructional tool is questionable at best. Even if they do have good intentions, this can have negative consequences for speakers who may lack the exposure or opportunity to use standard grammar. Besides, if someone has a non-prestige accent, so what? American, Australian, British English, New England, Midwestern, and Southern dialects, welcome to language variation. In a previous video, I discussed linguistic discrimination. In some cases, I suspect that prescriptivists intentionally weaponize grammar to validate stereotypical perceptions of non-standard speakers. But many times, people are not even aware of their own biases. And that's where self-identified descriptivists come in. Perhaps they're sensitive to the way some grammarians use shaming and stereotyping, and they push back. One of the most common responses is to point out, language changes, get used to it. True, language changes, and sometimes standard grammar does not keep up. But this argument is presented without context or further explanation. Language changes, grammar rules change. They just throw that out there. Well, people end up interpreting this argument as a free-for-all. They think descriptivists are saying grammar is obsolete regardless of register. This interpretation makes the staunch prescriptivists feel even more resolute in their mission to protect the language from what they perceive as complete anarchy. This language changes argument also misses the real issue, I believe. Are you fighting against standard grammar, or are you fighting against using standard grammar to discriminate against non-prestige linguistic groups? I think either descriptivists are missing the main point, or they need to clarify their position. And don't take me wrong, some do present the argument very well. It's just that those that don't make it harder for people who are trying to push back on the real issue of linguistic discrimination. Also, if you're a self-described linguist, therefore calling yourself a descriptivist, don't forget that descriptivism is an approach to studying language. After using a descriptive approach to do their research, linguists write their research papers using prescriptive standard grammar, and they don't feel they're betraying their profession. Academic English is appropriate for that register. As I said before, I think some prescriptivists gain the sense of superiority by pointing out how bad someone's grammar is. Ironically, when some descriptivists, even some linguists, respond to prescriptivists, they may be motivated by a similar sense of intellectual superiority. Sure, you know all about language, language varieties, and registers. If only prescriptivists would understand these concepts that I know. Yeah, well, you may still need to be a better language communicator. It's also ironic that sometimes some descriptivists themselves respond to grammar lovers with stereotypical perceptions. Not everyone talking about grammar online is one of those pesky prescriptivists. Well, that's just silly. So, who's right and who's wrong? Here's my 2 cents, both as a linguist and as a standard grammar buff. If you are a grammar lover, keep educating people about standard grammar and style. You're enabling them to have better opportunities in a business and professional world where standard formal language use is expected. People get to choose how they use the language, though. Being a judgmental prescriptivist in the negative sense of the word only makes you nasty. Perpetuating language biases and discriminating against certain linguistic groups doesn't make you a good educator. And if someone calls you out for being something about grammar, listen to them. They may have a valid point to make. But if you're not one of those pesky prescriptivists, keep up the good work.
Snap language.
Now, if you're a lover of language and linguistics, keep educating people about negative social implications of language bias and stereotyping. Keep in mind that language changes sometimes misses the point, so be clear about what you mean by that. Just saying language changes or there are different Englishes to a prescriptivist who's spewing out language discrimination and stereotypes is like saying there are different races to a racist. Be clear about what that means. Just being a descriptivist in the negative sense of the word doesn't necessarily make you an effective educator. If someone makes a comment about grammar, don't immediately assume they're shaming anyone. If they are, keep up the good work. I was talking to a linguist friend of mine about making this video about the feud between prescriptivism and descriptivism, and she said, "Oh, you mean the feud between authoritarians and anarchists?" Of course, she was being sarcastic, but, well, I knew I'm not the only one who thinks this feud is somewhat mythical. Please like and share this video with a prescriptivist or descriptivist, and make sure you click the bell when you subscribe to Snap Language. Thanks for stopping by. And you can buy this t-shirt from Snap Language. Bye.